Bible this morning from 2 Samuel, so chapter 18 from verse 19 through to chapter 19 verse 8. It's on page 323 of the church Bibles. We're continuing. Last week there was the battle where we saw David's son Absalom killed, and so we're picking up the story with the news of that coming back to David. 2 Samuel chapter 18 from verse 19. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and take the news to the king, that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hand of his enemies." "You are not the one to take the news today," Joab told him. "You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today, because the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to a Cushite, "Go, tell the king what you have seen." The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, "Come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite." But Joab replied, "My son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward." He said, "Come what may, I want to run." So Joab said, "Run." Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. While David was still sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gateway by the wall. As he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. The king said, "If he is alone, he must have good news." And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, "Look, another man running alone." The king said, "He must be bringing good news too." The watchman said, "It seems to me like the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok." "He is a good man," the king said. "He comes with good news." Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, "All is well." He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king." The king asked, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" Ahimaaz answered, "I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was." The king said, "Stand aside and wait here." So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, "My lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all who rose up against you." The king asked the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" The Cushite replied, "May the enemies of my lord the king, and all who rise up to harm you, be like that young man." The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Joab was told, "The king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." And for the whole army, the victory that day was turned into mourning, because on that day the troops heard it said, "The king is grieving for his son." The men stole into the city that day, as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. The king covered his face and cried out aloud, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab went into the house to the king and said, "Today you have humiliated all your men who have just saved your life, and the lives of your sons and daughters, and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today, the commanders, their men, mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now, go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come to you from your youth till now." So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. When the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. Meanwhile, the Israelites had fled to their homes. This is God's word.
Take seats. Good morning, it's great to see you. If you can have access to the passage that Andrea read for us earlier, That would be great. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the experience of maybe you need to visit your GP and you wait on the phone for a long time, and if you're lucky you get through and eventually you'll get an appointment, and if necessary your GP might give you a prescription, might you? They might sit there and you talk through your symptoms, they write something out, and you take that thing, your prescription, and you go to the pharmacy and you pay what seems like an unreasonable sum of money, and you receive that thing which is given to make you better, or if not make you better, manage your pain. And what I'm going to try and do for us this morning, in just a small way, is I want to try and provide you a prescription for grief. Grief is something that many of us will have experienced. If you haven't, you certainly will. And so what I want to do is try and give you some Bible medicines to help you in a season of grief. Maybe not heal you of every symptom, but maybe at least help you manage the pain. I'm aware that some of you will feel the need to get hold of this right now, today, and take this. For others of you, this is one of those things to file away somewhere, because one day you will need it. One day you will need Bible medicine to help you in that season of grief. So that's what I'm going to try and think about and focus on a little this morning as we look at this passage. As Andrew said, just something of the background. If you've been with us regularly, you'll know we've been working through 2 Samuel and something of the life of David. And in recent weeks, we've seen his son Absalom has risen up against him. He's led a sort of a rebellion against David. David's had to flee the city of Jerusalem. And last week, things all came to a head. There was this final kind of battle and showdown between Absalom and his troops and the army of David. And Absalom was killed. The king's son died. Joab, the commander of David's army, put 3 javelins through Absalom, killed him. And that's where we pick up the story, because somebody's got to go and tell David. Somebody's got to go and bring David the news, as Hazel said. And how does David receive that? Is that good news because his enemies have been defeated? Or is it bad news because his son is dead? In fact, last week we saw, didn't we? David had even explicitly asked his commanders, he said, deal gently with the boy. Deal gently with Absalom for my sake. And so we're going to see kind of 3 headings as we go through this, all related to this sort of theme of how we think about grief and manage it. And so here's our first heading for you this morning. Is that firstly, see Joab, how not to help the grieving. See Joab, how not to help the grieving. Joab should not be a grief counsellor. He's a man of action, and we see it again in this passage. So the battle is done. Absalom is dead. Somebody's got to take the news. Ahimaaz is the first to volunteer, isn't he? He says, look, let me go. He'd been close to David. He'd been one of those who'd been one of the sort of spies in Jerusalem for him. And he said, I'll take it. I'll take him the good news. And Joab says, no, not you. Not today. Because, verse 20 of chapter 18, because the king's son is dead. We're not really told why Joab feels this way, but we know from the past story that David hasn't always responded well to news of death. And it may be that Joab is trying to protect Ahimaaz. And so he says, let the Cushite go. Let this guy, let the foreigner go. He can go and tell him, and hey, what happens is what happens. He sends the Cushite, but Ahimaaz is quite insistent. He says, no, I really feel, I'm the man for the job. I need to go. And so eventually Joab just kind of runs out of patience and says, okay, off you go. He thinks the Cushite will win the race anyway, but he doesn't. Ahimaaz runs probably by a different route. He outruns the Cushite and he gets there first. And David and his watchman interpret this as good news. So they see the watchman is there. David he's waiting. He's waiting for news of his son. And the watchman sees a single runner, and David says, well, this must be good news. Again, we're not really told why, but David's an experienced military man. It may be that he thinks, look, if it's bad news, the whole army are retreating. So the fact there's a single runner, that's probably good news. And then the watchman says, it looks like it's Ahimaaz. And David says, well, I know Ahimaaz, he's a good fella. It must be good news. Ahimaaz arrives and he says shalom. Verse 28, he says all is well. In Hebrew, he says shalom. Now, shalom, you may remember, was the very last thing that David had said to Absalom as he left. And Ahimaaz comes and he calls out to the king, verse 28, shalom, peace, all is well. Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king. And notice what David says. David says, yeah, but what about Absalom? Is the young man safe? So he should be excited. He should be pleased that the victory is won. But his main concern is for Absalom. At this point, Ahimaaz bottles it, doesn't he? And he says, well, I saw a great confusion as Joab was about to send the king's servant, but I don't know what it was. Well, he does know. Joab told him. We literally just read it in verse 20. The king's son is dead. So why doesn't Ahimaaz tell him? Well, maybe Ahimaaz at this moment remembers kind of David's past actions to all those who've brought him difficult news, and he realised what Joab was trying to do, and so he just bottles it. He doesn't say anything, but the Cushite is not so shy. He comes with the news, and the king said, is the young man Absalom safe? Just tell me. And the Cushite replied, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. And the king was shaken. And he went and he grieves, and we'll come back to that. And so the victory is really turned into mourning. As the troops come back and they hear of David's grief, what should have been a victory march is actually a time of deep mourning. And Joab is having none of it. Joab's got zero patience for David in this moment. And he says, chapter 19, verse 5, he goes into the house where David is. And he says, today you've humiliated all your men. We've just saved your life, the lives of your sons and your daughters, your wives and your concubines. You love those who hate you, and you hate those who love you. You've made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. You will be pleased if Absalom were alive and we were dead. Now get out there and encourage the men. Or I swear by the Lord, if you don't, not a man will be left. And it'll be worse for you than all the calamities that have now come on your youth till now. Joab has no time at all for David's real felt grief. He says, look, we've just won the victory. This is a time, there should be like an open top kind of bus victory parade through the town. We should be popping champagne corks, David. Get out there. How dare you grieve for Absalom? He was a rotter anyway. He's got no patience, does he? Now, some of you may have seen this sort of diagram before. This task people grid. Some of you may have seen this in sort of workplace training type things. You see, most people bias more towards either task or people. So you might be on that grid. You might be really strong on the people skills and your ability to relate to others and get on well with people. You might be excellent at tasks and getting things done. You may be on this grid. You see that there are some people on this grid, aren't they, that sort of sit here. They're not good at people or task. That's one for HR, isn't it? Have a good HR person. So some of you are much more here, aren't you? You're great with people. Maybe not as hot on task, but if you're good with people, that's okay. Like, no one get hurt, no one get upset. Everyone's happy. It's a nice place to be. Some of you are really good at task. You're excellent at getting things done, but you shouldn't be left to manage too many teams of people. People may get upset. And occasionally you find these extraordinarily rare and gifted people up here. Now the question is, which one is Joab? Well, he's all task and no people, isn't he? He's all task. We see throughout, as we've seen his story so far, we continue to see it in Joab. He's incredibly competent. He's a military man. He's a man of action. He will get things done for you, but he's impetuous. And actually his ability to see things from another's point of view isn't really there at all. Biblically, which one's more important? If you had to biblically choose, which one do you want to favour out of task or people? Well, let me give you just three verses on the screen, which I hope answer the question for you. First at the top, Romans 8. Those who God foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. Or 2 Corinthians 3. and we are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory. Or 1 John 3, what we will be has not yet been known, but we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him. So what's God's purpose for you and me? Well, his purpose in eternity past is that you are destined to be conformed to the image of Jesus. And the work he's doing in you now by his Spirit is you are being transformed into the image of Jesus. And the work that will one day finally be done is that one day we shall be like him. What is God's purpose for you primarily as a Christian? It's that you be conformed to the image of Christ. That's the most important thing. It's not competencies or abilities or gifts or talents. It's that your character and your Christ-likeness are ever increasing. That is the work God is doing. That is what he wants. Now, boys and girls, I'm going to show you a math symbol. Okay, I want to see if any of you recognise this. Sunday, Maths Day. Who knew? Anyone recognise what that means? Anyone know what that symbol means? Boys and girls? Anyone know? Yes, good. I heard it. So it means greater than. Okay, so very simple maths. So what's going to appear on the left of the screen is greater than what's going to appear on the right of the screen, according to the Bible. Okay, so here it is. Christ-likeness is greater than competence. Or who you are in Jesus is greater than what you do for Jesus. Or righteousness is more important than rightness. You see, Joab's on the right side. Like his sort of ultimate aim and intention is probably the right end. But the way he goes about it, there's not much fruit of the Spirit in Joab's life, is there? You think the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. There's not much of that in Joab. And the Bible tells us consistently that the people we are, the characters we're developing, our desire to grow in our Christ-likeness far outstrips our talent, our ability, our competence, our capacity. Secondly, this morning we've seen Joab. Let's see David. Mourn with those who mourn, which is a verse from the New Testament in Romans chapter 12. Mourn with those who mourn. We skipped over it a little bit as I just recap the story, but I want you to notice how the narrator slows us down as the news comes to David. So if you've got a Bible, have a look down at this. Boys and girls, I want you to do a bit more maths, a bit more counting for me. Have a look down. So chapter 18, verse 33. Okay, I want you to start counting in a minute. What I want you to count, I want you to count the words, wherever you see the words, my son. Okay, count that as one. So we're told, verse 33, the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and he wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom. If only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." And then again, go down to chapter 19, verse 4, as the troops are kind of stealing back into the city. Verse 4 of 19, the king covered his face. He cried aloud, "Oh, my son, Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." How many did you get? 8. 8 times. Now, what's the narrator doing here? You see, sometimes in the biblical storytelling, we rattle along at quite a pace, but sometimes we slow right down. And we follow it almost in real time. And the narrator's wanting you to slow right down and notice something here. And the narrator wants you to notice David's grief. I think it's the point of the repetition and the emphasis, saying, my son, Absalom, my son. My son. He's heartbroken. He's grief-stricken that he's lost his son. And the narrator wants us to pause and reflect on that. Because truth be told, Absalom was an enemy. We've traced Absalom's story. He was a rotter. He was a bad egg. He did some terrible things. And yet the narrator says, but do you see the heart of the father? As he grieves, But even this sort of a son. A guy called Michael Milton wrote a book called Songs in the Night, and he devotes an entire chapter to David's grief. And he identifies three components, or perhaps three elements, of David's grief. And I'll show you with them. The first, he says, is this. The first thing about David's grief is there's just the grief of loss. There's just the searing loss of something dear to him. He writes this, no doubt, while his servants could only think of Absalom the rebel, David's grieving mind was picturing a fuzzy-haired little boy who had crawled into his lap, or a youth who had ridden a donkey for the first time. There is something about grief, isn't there, that's natural and good and healthy. Actually, we see throughout the Bible, grief is a good thing. Jesus wept at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. There is something as if you believe men and women are made in the image of God, and therefore have this dignity and this value and this worth, whatever degree that has been marred, it's never obliterated or eradicated, is it? There is still a human being here that is made in the image of God, and therefore is of infinite worth and enormous dignity. Whatever they've done, whatever Absalom had done, this is still true. And it is still to be grieved over. The word bereavement, it's reckoned that the source of it is there's an old English word, a Saxon word, reeve. And reeve means to steal. And there's a sense in there of bereavement. It feels like something has been stolen. Something has been kind of robbed out of the world when an image bearer is taken. And so there's something here that says, look, grief's good. If people are really made in the image of God, then grief is the absolutely natural response to the loss of such a wonderful and precious thing, even if they're as bad as Absalom. The second component Milton identifies to the grief is, and this is maybe more particular to David, but the grief of regret. The grief of regret as David perhaps regrets his own sin and regrets he perhaps hadn't done more about Absalom's. He says, David cries the cry of a man who wishes he could go back and change the clock. If only he'd not taken more than one wife. If only he'd repented of that and sought to bring peace to his family. If only he'd not plotted the murder of Uriah. If only he'd intervened as a parent to deal with the horrible situation with Tamar and Amnon and to quiet the heart of Absalom. If only, if only, if only. Maybe some of you have a little bit of that the grief that comes with regret, the regret over things not done or not said that maybe should have been. Or maybe the things done and said that shouldn't have been. Or maybe the things that never got said for a very long time. And we live with that, don't we? We live with the pain of that regret. And the kind of the Bible comfort and medicine here is to say that there's grace to cover that. There's forgiveness for our sin and the sin of others. And the gift of the Spirit so that we know God to be the Father of compassion, the God of all comfort, so we don't walk alone. It doesn't take away all the pain, it doesn't make it easy. But it means that there's a place to go with regrets. We're not left to simply hang on to them to our own dying day. There's a throne of grace that we can bring all of it to and ask Jesus to help us with. And then the third component, possibly of David's grief, is the sort of the grief over Absalom's eternity. He said Absalom had died in rebellion without expressing one word of regret, without one request for forgiveness, without one act or word that it will be pleasant to recall in time to come as a foil to the bitterness caused by his rebellion. Here is a terrible source of bitter grief. This really is painful, isn't it, for Christians? When We grieve those who have made no indication in their own life of ever wanting to know God or have anything to do with him. This was the thing I found personally hardest at my grandfather's funeral. He'd been a lifelong outspoken and committed atheist. He had a humanist funeral, and the humanist has nothing to say at a funeral other than, well, let's just be grateful for a life. Yeah, but what else? I remember standing at that funeral, and the thing that was I was finding it hardest to deal with was that sense of, but where is he? Like, where is he actually? That you don't want to think about that too long, do you? Because it's too painful. I've had Christians ask me about that many times over the years, and I've always gone back to Genesis chapter 18, where God is determined to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah for their evil. And Abraham pleads for the city. And as he's pleading, he says, effectively Abraham lands on this, he says, will not the judge of all the earth do right? As he pleads for the city, he said, will not the judge of all the earth do right? And I think that's something you can cling to as a Christian. You can cling to that sense. Like, I don't know. I'm not the judge of other people's eternities. I'm not given that responsibility, thankfully. But I can say, look, will not the judge of all the earth do right? He will. He will. And there will come a day when actually when the veil is removed for us, when it will be right and it will be seen to be right. And we will see it as he sees it, and we will understand it in that sense. It's will not the judge of all the earth do right? He will do right. Doesn't mean it's easy now for us to try and process that or ask that, but there's a promise there about the character of God that you and I hang on to. The judge of all the earth will do right. But it also forces something of the question back to us, doesn't it? Because in some sense, I can't know about other people. You know, sometimes you get that question, don't you? But what about those who've never heard? What about those who've never responded? So I don't know. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? But the question really comes back to us, doesn't it? Say, well, but you do know. You have heard. So what are you doing with it? What will you do with it? If the call is there to respond today to the love of God as expressed in Jesus, if the call is to turn and come back to him, the real question is, what are you doing with that? Third and final heading this morning is this: see Jesus. He will wipe away every tear. We read that at the end of the Bible, Revelation 21:22. He'll wipe away every tear. There's a fascinating little statement David makes in here. Have a look down again at verse 33. As the king is shaken and he cries out, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. He then says, if only I had died instead of you. And you understand that the sort of the heart cry in that for David, but you think, but actually it wouldn't have done any good at all, would it? It would have done nothing. No good would have come of David dying in Absalom's place. In fact, probably worse things would have happened. David cannot die for Absalom. David can die for his own sin. He can face the consequence for his own wrongdoing, but David is not a man in a position to die for another that they might somehow be forgiven. But of course, as we think about kind of the whole Bible story, and we think about tracing that story into the New Testament, we can't help but go to Jesus, can we? Jesus said all of the Old Testament points to him. And even here in this moment, there's that glimpse of great David's greater son, the anointed king, who says, well, I can die instead of you. He's the king who comes and he weeps over Jerusalem, doesn't he? He weeps over lost people. And he says, I can and I will die instead of you. To pay the price for all of our wrongdoing that we might be forgiven. And then amazingly, he doesn't stay dead. He doesn't just die instead of you. He's risen to life, which gives us that hope, doesn't it? Actually, grief and death, though painful, are not final and ultimate. Death's a painful word. It's not the final word. The resurrection tells you, if you put your trust in Jesus, well, he got himself through death. He will get you through death to the other side. boys and girls, I don't know if you've had this experience yet, but one day you will, of going to a burial. And at a burial, something very powerful is being signified and symbolised. And I want you to know this now before you see one, so that when you see one, you know what's happening. Because when you go to a burial, you will stand by a hole that's been dug, and the coffin will be lowered, and I want you to know what's happening in that moment. Because in that moment, what's not happening is we are not disposing of rubbish. That's not happening. At a burial, you are not disposing, or you're not finding just a convenient way to take out the trash. No, at a burial, you are sowing a seed. That's what's actually happening. As that coffin goes down, you are sowing a seed in expectation that one day something is going to emerge that will be much more glorious than what went in. That's what's happening, isn't it? When you stand at a graveside at a burial, you're not disposing of rubbish, you're sowing a seed. Jesus showed us that. Paul told us that. In the expectation of what's to come. And in that sense, Jesus helps us turn on its head what's happening in this story, isn't it? In this story, the victory is turned into mourning. But in the resurrection, the mourning is turned into victory. One more thing as we close that I want you to see here. I want you to see that I think this is an interesting aspect to this story. In some ways, this is a sort of prodigal son story, but with the other ending. Because here we've got the king, the father is watching and waiting for the prodigal, isn't he? He's watching. He's waiting, he's anticipating, he's hoping the prodigal will come home. But the prodigal never does. And the father is utterly heartbroken. And I want you to see that side of that story, because if you're a prodigal, if you're far off and you're keeping your distance because you think the father wants nothing to do with you, then see something of the father's heart in this. David was a man after God's own heart. So this is the father's heart. That when you're far off in that distant country, his heart is broken, his heart is longing, his heart is yearning that you would come. There's a song that's doing the rounds on social media at the moment, which I think is tragic, actually. It's a Christian song, which I think completely misunderstands God. The song is called Yet. That's the title of the song, Yet. And the lyric goes like this. God, don't give up on me yet. I know I'm not your best bet, but I'm trying. So don't give up on me yet. And God, don't leave me here alone. I know I need to grow still, and I'm trying. Don't leave me here alone. I think that song gets God completely wrong. God, don't give up on me. I know I'm not your best bet, but I'm trying. Don't give up on me. As if he does, as if he would. That's not God, is it? That's not the Father who stands watching and waiting. If that's you this morning, you're thinking, I daren't come back because I know God wants nothing to do with me. He couldn't possibly accept me. He's kind of washed his hands and done with me. He wouldn't even open the door to me. No, he's standing, he's watching, and he's waiting. Why stay off in a far country? Why stay out in the cold? Why stay a long way off when the Father's heart is that you would come? You'll come home. Journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, so why don't you make that step today? Why don't you make a step kind of right where you are right now to say, Father in heaven, I want to come home. And you'll find the open arms of embrace waiting to bring you home. So today we weep with those who weep, but we do not grieve as those who have no hope. Because tomorrow we know he will wipe away every tear. There will be no more mourning or suffering or crying or pain, for the old order of things will have passed away. Shall I pray for us and hand back to Barry? Father in heaven, we thank you and praise you that in this world we are not just sort of bags of chemicals sloshing through with no real significance or meaning. We thank you that as those made in your image, we are so valuable and precious to you. So when we lose, we do grieve. There is a sense of something being stolen. And we thank you that you do promise your presence to comfort and to guide. And we thank you that you have gone to prepare a place and to make all things new. So we do not grieve as those who have no hope. But we do grieve as feeble and weak humans who need your help to cling on to that hope and to take the next step in our own journey. So would you help us to do that? And maybe, Father, if there's someone this morning that needs to make that first step towards you, help them to do that right now. In Jesus' name, amen.